introduce Roberto Parada. Roberto's got a very interesting history that we won't go into, but I worked with Roberto at UWS, where he did a very strong PhD on bullying, focusing on both the measurement issues, but also intervention and conceptual issues as well. And he's subsequently got an academic position at, it's no longer UWS, it's Western Sydney University, but at the same institution. And so he has been around for long enough that he was eligible for a study leave, and so he asked if he could come here and we could sort of jumpstart his bullying research and pick up some strings and pick up some pieces that we left off before. So he's going to present sort of a conceptual overview of his thinking in the area, and then he's going to talk just very briefly about some of the things that he's doing now while he's here that are really very interesting. So I'll go ahead and hand it over to you.
Thank you very much everyone for coming. I appreciate it. So like Herb said, what I want to do first is I just want to give you it's a conceptual paper. I've got lots of different directions that I go with. And it's to do with the fact that, with the way that we approach interventions in general, but I'm focusing on bullying. So this was a paper that, it's a summary of a paper that I presented about a year and a half ago in Sweden when the World Anti-Bullying Forum people met there. And it was about, let's think outside the box, and why we need to do that. So what I hope to do today is that we'll first just very briefly talk about, well, how effective are anti-bullying interventions. Then I want to discuss whether or not we actually have an agreed solution. It's like, do we actually know what to do about bullying? Because the media often tells schools almost like if they sit there going, no, let the bullying go ahead, like we won't do anything about it. Then I want to just diverge a little bit and talk about the nature of problems. And what I mean by that is like the nature of problems themselves. Like, not the nature of the problem of bullying, but conceptualizing what is a problem, which can be problematic. Excuse me. So the last thing is I'll summarize, and people who think very, they spend a lot of time thinking about what is a problem in its definitional terms will get upset with me if there's any of you here today, because I'll summarize it very quickly and just go into the nature of problems as ill-structured and structured problems, and then bring that back into bullying and the significance of that. But what I was hoping is that all of you are working in different things and knowing about, and you're working on problems. You're working on problems, and we seldom think about what is a problem. How can we call it a problem, and does the nature of the problem have an effect on how we approach it? And the answer is yes. And I was hoping that at least that section, if you're not very interested in bullying, at least that section will maybe make you think about what you're working on now and how you're approaching it. So I wanted to finish off then on conclusions and what's the significance of this for bullying interventions. So I want to try and I'm going to try and keep brief, so then we can actually have a chat. I would like to have a chat at the end in relation to this or other matters of my background, which I'll do a little bit more a little bit later. So just all of this are an in-press meta-analysis. The last most comprehensive meta-analysis, which was done to studies up to 2009, showed that in relation to what we know about now about bullying interventions, if you get a university team to come to your school, direct your intervention, help you out, give you the resources, stay with you, measure it, monitor it, help you with fidelity. So that's a big ask. The best, on average, the best you can hope for is about a 20% reduction. And I think that should be surprising, because we don't talk as if bullying interventions at best work on 20%. So that's the equivalent of me saying to you, hey, how you going? You're really ill. Could kill you in theory, they could kill you. Take this. How often does it work? 20% of it. We would have thought by now we would be able to do better than that. There are issues of measurement, which I'll talk at the end of the presentation about some of these. But I think that one of the key things that's happening in relation to why bullying research is in advance, it's how we actually, bullying is being conceptualized as a problem. So when we, in this, I know this is an awful slide, when you've been thinking about presentation, that's an awful slide, but it's more to do with the impact of the awfulness rather than the content. So don't try and read it, just in your head, just think, there's lots of things there, right? And that's the purpose of this slide. Because basically, when they looked at the components of a bullying intervention, so when we say, let's go and do an intervention, there's at least 20 that were identified in this particular meta-analysis, and all of these people doing different things. Yet, they are all under the umbrella of anti-bullying post-school intervention. So the first thing that we need to notice when someone says an anti-bullying post-school intervention is that no one's talking about the same thing. No one. They're basically talking about completely different things. So when we say effectiveness of an anti-bullying post-school intervention, we're actually, again, not talking about the same thing. We're talking about lots of different components. So that brought me to think, so I've been looking at this meta-analysis very closely. I'll tell you a little bit more about that later. And it got me to think, well, how can we conceptualize these different things? How can we gain, how can we find out what actually works? So what I did is I just did a very sort of like a kind of qualitative kind of content analysis, and I created this sort of, it's called a color grid. So in this color grid, I just grabbed a couple of the interventions that were looked at in this meta-analysis, and which were shown to have significant positive effects. You might remember, up to about 20% reduction. So even though they did well, it wasn't that much harm. And I looked at, out of the 20 components, which components did they use? And you can see that there are some here that did not use any of the 20 components, and they got a significant. And so the green ones are they used that component, the red ones are they did not use that component. So I looked at that, and I was trying to get like a conceptual understanding of what works rather than going by what the author says, oh, these things work, these 20 things work. You can see straight away, well, there's interventions that don't. This one at the bottom here hardly used any of the 20, and they actually got a good effect size and a significant thing. So then I got naughty, because I heard you know that I sometimes go on the slide of, I'm a bit like cheeky, my wife always says. And I go, oh, what about the non-significant interventions? How do you compare the two? And it makes sense, doesn't it? So, yeah. Oops. And these are just presented as substance. I did it to all of them. There's no pattern. There isn't. Basically, I'll be collegial. Basically, we aren't aware right now what exactly we're doing. If you're not collegial, it's chance. Basically, what we're seeing here is that even those interventions, and remember, these are research team-led interventions. In this meta-analysis, they didn't allow just the local school studies. They were they had to have a pre-test, a post-test, all those things to be allowed into meta-analysis. And basically, what you notice from this is that the conclusion I drew from this is that everyone does the same thing, yet they get different results. This is well known. 2004, there was another meta-analysis, which in fact they didn't have enough studies to be able to produce effect sizes. And the conclusion by Smith and his colleagues was that really the only reason why we can endorse a whole school approach is because it makes theoretical sense. And I'll get to that in a moment, because it doesn't quite make theoretical sense. Not because of the evidence. 2008, they found no significant differences. That's Weddell did another meta-analysis, no significant difference. In fact, they did a meta-analysis of the studies available to that point, and they found that if you, the difference was if you did a bullying intervention in Europe, it worked. If you did exactly the same intervention in the United States, it didn't work. Oops, again. And then there was this one that came in 2009 that tried to be more inclusive and suggested that these were the things, but as you can see, and I'll talk about a bit later, that you can imagine now that what I'm getting into is really deep into the data and showing, well, how did you come up with these conclusions? Well, clearly, if you just do a conceptual analysis, you can see that there are no clear guidelines as to what works. So this led me to to think about, well, why are they so keen on the whole school approach? So what's happening here? I remember Seligman, which must be something rather known to many of you, wrote a book many years ago called What Works and What Doesn't. And one of the things that stuck in my head when I read that book was that in interventions, people often have sacred cows and they don't know. So they're developing interventions and they say, you can't doubt these sacred cows, you can doubt your results, you can doubt all the things, but these are now 20 years of consecutive meta-analysis, sort of showing that this whole school approach may work, let's be nice, in reducing about 20% of bullying. What's the conceptual understanding that draws them to that? Well, they use Bronfenbrenner's ecological model. So we have the individual in the microsystem. I imagine most of you would be familiar with this model. Is that correct? So this is, so this is a multi-level model, and where we have effects from the person across the different systems in which they function. So the idea is that if we intervene at the whole school with these sorts of things, which are predominantly refutation, well, it will filter down to the individual at the school level. So we're actually using Bronfenbrenner's kind of theorizing, which he actually was talking about genetics. Like people forget that. Bronfenbrenner was actually trying to explain epigenetic and phenomenetic effects in people, not social behavior. But who cares? Let's just see, it's a nice looking model. So bullying, and there's been at least 5 papers, and Espelage from now at Miami, Florida, is leading an ecological model to bullying, and this is the predominant model that we use. So the issue for this is that, as far as we can tell, for the last 20 years, based on all these repetitive studies, bullying at school, and not because even when you control for measurement and knowledge, seems to be on the rise, or at least has not gone down. When I first started working with her, when I met, we thought, hey, we better get onto this because it's a flavour of the month. We literally used sometimes, this was 15 years ago maybe when I first spoke to her about it. And we really thought, this is the time to strike, and then, it'll dissipate. As you know, it's exactly the opposite. And that's because we found out more about it. So it's either staying constant or it's gone up. Now the problem with the ecological model is that if we look at every other, so this is statistics in relation to crime rates in the United States. When I don't want to sleep, that's the sort of stuff that I dig up, right? From 1990 to 2016, in crimes per 100,000 going down. We still don't know why. This is the same in Australia. When we look at 13 violence in England, all of them going down, and by a lot. So we've got in Australia, for example, in the last 2 years, in a population of almost 30 million, there were around, which is still a lot, but there were around 130 murders. So we can't do quite a CAS in Australia. You run out of bodies. So the people are getting gentler in the meso system, all around these schools, and all your life. And the latest person who's caught on to this is obviously Steven Pinker, who's written that new book because he was he's noticed this, and The Better Angels of Our Nature is another book that Steven Pinker from Harvard's written, where he documents this, that all around the world we're currently living, at least by the statistical analysis, in the safest times we've ever lived, yet it does not feel that way. But these statistics, in survey after survey, do not apply to bullying. In schools, bullying is on the rise, it's that operates maintain itself quite stable. These are my favourite ones, so robbery. Vehicle theft, homicide, robbery. These are for statistical Canada, and I don't want to leave anyone out. So Canadians always going to be speeding everywhere. You're nice, just nicer than most. That's a study on its own. How did that happen? So clearly, just going by that hypothesis, it should be that if we've done nothing in relation, really violent behaviour in school should have been going down. If Bronfenbrenner was correct, and well, they're not. I mentioned that before. They're not. So this is where I digress and I said, well, what's going on? Because it's not like we don't want bullying to go down. actually want, it's something that people want to do. At its worst, it can actually cause young people to learn. So my background is in clinical analysis psychology. I work with young people clinically. I've worked for many years now, 20 years with the reason why I got involved in bullying was after working with a young boy with Tourette's syndrome who was being presented at the emergency after an attempt to take his own life. And he was a huge kid. And I thought, oh, my kids are being bullied at school. And so surely we know how to do, we know what to do about that. So I went to look for the book on CBT for bullying or something like that. And it wasn't there. So this is not a new problem, it's an old problem, and it's always been a problem that we want to do something about. So I started thinking, well, what's going on here? And I think what's going on is in relation to how we see problems. I'll give you the espresso, maybe the ristretto actually version of this research, okay? So basically, problems are not like gelato, they come only in two flavors. The first one is what's called, and I may skip some slides, I do this to my students all the time, then I just skip 20 slides. Just don't worry too much about the slides. The first one is what we call a structured problem. A structured problem is a problem that has a known solution. So basically, 2 plus 2 equals 4. 4, that's a structured problem. We have a known solution, and whether you're in Mars or theoretically anywhere in the universe, that will be the answer. Although I wasn't that crash hot at maths when I was a kid, and I used to try and convince my maths teacher that maybe it's 5. She said no, it's 4. It's 4 all the time. So those are structured problems. They have a set number of parameters. The key thing about structured problems is that they tend to be context independent. Like I said before, 2 plus 2 is 4, irrespective of what you are. All of the variables to solve the problem are contained within the problem. You don't have to go outside of it. It's the application of a set rule and you get the result. There's another variety of problem, which is really the variety that social scientists and educationists really deal with, which are what's called ill-structured problems. Now, ill-structured problems are contextual problems. They actually emerge from the context that they're in, but require a solution that could look the same, but it may not be. So, I don't know how many slides I think that's. So, let me go back here. So the example that I often use is bridges, okay? So a bridge, so the problem is, how do I get from this landmass to this landmass? That's the problem. If you treat that as a structured problem, you go and you buy a bridge and pop it like that. But you're already going, oh, well, that's not what we do. We get engineers and they survey the context. We know that the solution is something that bridges the two things. But the actual concept of bridge is not definitive. What counts as a bridge is actually fluid. The concept of bridge is static. And that's what differentiates ill-structured problems from structured problems. And this is a big deal because if you treat ill-structured problems as structured, that is, we know the solution, there it is, you run into a lot of trouble. If you treat ill-structured problems as what they are, what you first have to do is you have to gather information about the contextual aspect of it. You know what, you have a guide that you want something to bridge it, but the reality is that, all these things are the same solution to exactly the same problem. But they're all completely different. So my hypothesis is that what's going on with them is that we know we want to stop it, so we know we want to get it A. But for reasons of, I think, historical just thinking, and there's been a lot of work in when you get into what's called groupthink. So bullying research is a very tight path. That there's been a set of axioms, and the whole school approach being one of them, that are sacred. And it's just assumed that it works. It's assumed that we have to do a whole school approach, and these are the things that we need to do about it. And the fact of the matter is that, well, the data shows that that's not quite right. That in fact, even when you look at the actual studies, everyone, even though they're calling it a whole school approach, they're actually doing very different things. doing very different things and calling it the same name. So what happens is when you treat an ill-structured problem as a structured problem, this weird cognitive stuff happens to the researcher or the person. One of the key ones is that it creates unnecessary boundaries. So it says only these are the things from which you can choose to solve this problem. And you can see that that's a problem already. It boxes you in. It says, oh, this is the only thing that can work. It dismisses other possibilities purely not because they've been tried, but it dismisses them because they're not part of the sacred. Does that make sense? So for example, to get into what I may want to talk a little bit further, in measurement of bullying, which is a whole problem, one of the things they talk about is that the definition of bullying has a power imbalance. But no one's ever justified why that is. But if your measure doesn't have power imbalance in it, they say this is not a good measure. Why? Because it doesn't have power imbalance in it. Well, how do you measure that? Oh, we don't know, but it should have power imbalance. The second thing they do is that in measures of bullying, originally they started off with a definition of bullying. Right? So bullying is blah, blah, blah. Then have you been bullied? A single line. That's how they measure these things. When they criticize the measure, they usually say, oh, your measure doesn't have a definition of bullying. And I say, my measure doesn't. Yes. Well, then it's not a measure of bullying. And you can see there's a bit of a faulty logic in there because there's been a presupposition made that this is what something looks like, but the evidence is not showing that. But the thing that we presupposed is what's correct. Because many of you deal with psychometrics, you will know that, generally speaking, a depression measure doesn't say, depression is da 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 da, and then they ask you all the things, because we know that there is, a latent factor that's affecting, I don't have to explain to you, and if that's sort of affecting that, at least here I don't have to explain to you. In other places I really have to explain it. And that's theoretically causing the thing that we're measuring, and we're indirectly measuring all the time, right? No, you have to have a definition. IQ tests, they'll say G is, well, good luck in defining that, and please do these matrices, and now we're going to measure it. So, bullying research has certain things which lock them in, and I think they suffer what we call these unnecessary boundaries. They also get into what we call functional fixedness. So what that is that they only talk about bullying, and this is why cyberbullying is such a big problem for bullying researchers. When it would come, for example, with the power imbalance, which is, they love it, I'm not kidding, it's like, there must be an effigy to power imbalance in bullying, so they light candles to it. Power imbalance. Well, here comes cyberbullying. You know what can happen in cyberbullying? You can go off. How do you define power imbalance in looking at a screen? Don't talk about that. And I dare you to find paper that's tried to do that. They just don't. They don't talk about it. I'm working on one at the moment, but they don't talk about it. And they, I mean, the bullying research. They haven't come to terms with the fact that power imbalance is goes out the window when it comes to cyberbullying. Because basically, no one makes you turn on that computer. No one makes you not block people. There's no one there physically restraining you from doing these things. So unless you get into very convoluted definitions, it becomes a bit problematic. The next thing is that the actual intervention is dealt with by assumptions. So we have boundaries, no, you cannot do that. We have fitnesses, this is the way we do it, and assumptions, and it will work. So the actual, and how do we know this? Is because when you look at the reviews of bullying research, you see how awful they actually are. Like the interventions are terrible. Like, and I'm not being mean. I'm being brief because I can't get into being nice, but I'm being brief. It's not just me being nasty. Like, there's no pre-measures, for example. They don't do pre-measures, so you can't do. Or they just do one follow-up 3 months later. Like, this is not me telling you. So in the last when they decided, now we're going to be super thorough in which interventions we're going to leave for a meta-analysis, which was done in Spain. They were left with 14 studies in the last 25 years. Because all the others were just one single item measures, or they just use specific, what percentage before, what percentage, like that's good. So because it's an assumption, it's going to work. It's going to work, of course it's going to work. It's always worked. Not really. So all of this together creates a mental set. So my argument at the moment is that when people approach developing bullying interventions, enacting them, or working through them, what actually is that they come with a whole set of preset ideas which are historical, or which there's very little evidence of, and then which, and this is even in the publication rejection piece. So Herb and I, when the thing that we got hit with one of the publications on using my measure was that it's not really bullying. So when we try to go to a bullying kind of journal, because you haven't got the definition first, so you have to get published somewhere else, right? So that even in the way that they actually look at what you propose to be the intervention, they're sort of like the guarding of the sacred, and the sacred is whole school, etc., etc., etc. So it creates this mental set. Now, what the effect of this mental set is that we get stuck, and we don't progress. And the proof is in the pudding. This is not my opinion. It's in the fact that in the last 20 years, at least 6 meta-analyses, if you look at the discussion section of this meta-analysis, you will see that they all say nearly identical things. Instrumentation, extremely poor. Measurement, very bad. There's atheoretic. So basically, we're going to do this in bullying because we're going to do this in bullying. There's no underlying theory which says whole school X, Y, Z. The reason is just, oh, this is what we did before, so we're going to do it again. So, just very briefly, because I want to make sure that we have another chat, I'm not going to bore you too much, is that if we then take over the people who do research on ill-structured problems, who are these people? Engineering. In engineering journals, it's full of this. They are constantly how to teach engineers ill-structured problem solving. Where else do you see this? Army, West Point. And I'm the professor at the moment, is the leading person in the world. That is because, you know, you get into a theater, that's what it's called on a battlefield. It's a theater, you don't know what's going to happen. It's fluid. So the actual problem solving has to emerge from within the theater. They do research on this. Who also does research on this? NASA does a lot of research on this. So we don't know what's in Mars. so going up there with presumptions is not going to be good. So you need to know how to teach people to problem solve within the context. Where this is not done, which is interesting, is in clinical side, social work, when it should be done. But it is done in medicine, particularly in oncology, in how to actually do research on ill-structured problems. So what do they suggest? This is where I have to go and dig in for all this stuff. Is that basically when one or more of the situations are not specified, there is sort of a pattern that you can engage in. And I'll show you the pattern now. So first of all, the context matters more than the theory at that moment. So basically you've got to look at your context and begin to look and realize that the context is from where the actual emergence of the problem is. Not that there's this problem that happens to land in there. So context becomes very important, and the person knowing their context becomes even more important. Let me fast forward to here, the steps. So basically, what this is construing is that, as you can see, this is leading me to postulate that the way that we actually intervene is not by showing up at a school and having set things to do. Is we should have a smorgasbord of certain things to do. Because the first step is to actually realize what are the contextual constraints of that place. Are the teachers on board? They think that there's enough, that this warrants an intervention. What are the contexts? So this is the equivalent of the engineer measuring the soil of this side of the lake, the soil of that side of the lake, and saying we need to dig, we need to go up, there's these things that we need to do. But the context dictates what are the preliminary steps of the intervention, not the problem, the context. I said that, so I'll go to you while doing my students, sorry. Second, you clarify alternative options, positions. This is a fancy way of saying you brainstorm. So this is why you see all those engineers and you see when you're driving by and they're like, just looking at the thing. And they just go, well, these are we don't have bedrock. What are the different solutions to this? How do we, what are the alternative opinions? What has been done already What's the purpose of this? What are we going to be doing? This is particularly important in working with schools, because what often happens is that along comes a well-intended PhD student or researcher and pushes the intervention onto the school without first understanding whether the school requires this intervention or whether they require all of your intervention. Maybe they just after one particular bit. But because we like intervention fidelity, which is a good thing, no, you must do all of these bits. There's a way around that, but I won't get into that right now. But I think that that's one of the things of intervention fidelity sometimes gets us on the wrong side of the school, because the school thinks, I really don't need all of that. I really like your school policy, I really like your educational resources, and we want the teacher training. That's what we need. Which then generates the problem solutions. So it's a collaborative approach in relation to that. Most bullying interventions don't do this. They just go in there and here's a package and this is what we're going to do. In fact, at the moment, the KIVA program, which is being run in 90% of Finnish schools, and when I was at the conference, the level of disappointment by the group of researchers led by Christina Salvivani, who's a lovely woman, about the fact that the schools are not doing it. They're just taking pieces and they just, which is all of your experience if you've done research in schools. You get your thing and the school goes, yeah, sure, we'll implement it. Go away, and when you come back it will all be good. And then you come back and they do this bit and they do that bit. And so they already do this. The school does it, they just tell you because you're a researcher that, yeah, we'll do all of it. Sure. And if you work clinically, and if you ever work clinically with young people with anxiety, and out there, if any of you have done this, and you better try to do get them to do a breathing relaxation exercise, and that they do it as homework, I'll give you $100. If they did it as homework, I will give you. In 20 years, they'll go, yeah, I'll do it. No worries. And then the textbook says you should spend 3 sessions talking about why they didn't do the breathing exercise, right? Yeah, good luck with that too. It's not going to work. Let's say rapport is at the door at that point. Then there's an assessment of the available, so you collaborate with the school, here are all the bits, which means you like, I like this bit, I like this bit, I like this bit, can we please squeeze this? Yeah, okay, you can have that bit. So there's a collaboration. You know, that's a bit of the bridge with lights and stuff like that. The engineer goes, what do you want lights for? You know, engineers like, and can I add a curve? No, it can just be flat. If you know engineers, you know, they don't like too much fancy stuff like this. But in this section, we assess the viability, and then basically we do that by arguing and counter-arguing. And most researchers are afraid of doing this, but this happens at the individual level clinically very often. That it's called psychoeducation, and you talk to the person and say, this is why I believe this would be good, and most people will then go, oh, okay, I understand now, or they'll insist and say, well, no, we don't need that. So as you can, as you're getting the idea now, even though we're going to end up with a bridge, we're going to end up with a bullying intervention. This is a lot more fluid. It's actually born from the school by their context, and what the researcher brings into it is that they bring their knowledge as to what's worked and what hasn't worked, but also the fact that we don't know quite yet what's working. And then there's the implementation and the monitoring, and then these two are cyclic. And this is the other thing. So basically they come in, they do the bullying intervention, time 2, time 3, see you later. There's no feedback from the time 2, again, fidelity. What's supposed to happen here is that if you build part of the bridge and you put a stress test on it and it sort of breaks, well, you don't tell the people, oh, just keep on building it because it's good for our, our research fidelity. The bridge is going to fall down. No, that's okay. You reinforce that section again. And no one goes, oh, about that. In fact, that's what you would expect. Whereas what happens in most school-based interventions is that you get feedback very early on at the first post-test, and it ain't working. And you're like, oh, just let it go. And you don't go back because of fidelity and change that. So in conclusion, I'll leave it there. In conclusion, if you thought we knew what to do about bullying, the answer is, well, not. We don't. So there's a lot of scope for research there. if you're going to do research in this area, my suggestion, my humble suggestion is that it needs to be approached as an ill-structured problem. What that means is that we do know that we want to reduce bullying, we do know we want to increase other certain positive things, but we're not quite certain how to get there. So there has to be a fluid collaborative approach between yourself and what we know. So yourself is that this has been shown to be somewhat effective, and the people experiencing the difficulties, is this suggestive to them? Does this solve their problem? Do they see it like that? And what my hope is that in developing an intervention like that, is that we'll get better effects. So that's it. Thank you so much for your patience, and I'd love to, if you have time, I've got a couple of minutes, any questions that you have, answer any of those. But thank you very much for your patience.
Can you tell us about some of the things you're going to do here?
Oh, okay. So because of all of this, there's three magical things. If I get two of them, then it will work. First of all, I've gone to the meta-analyses, and we're going to be using a multi-level approach to be able to actually try and assess with what we've got, what are the bits of work, and whether they actually make a difference in relation to the results as best as we possibly can. So that's one of the projects. It's proven to be complex because, like I said, most of the interventions are the same. The core results and the data is very good. Number two is finalising my takeover of the world in bullying measurement. One of the things that I did for my PhD is I developed what's called the adolescent peer relations instrument, which is being supervised by a herd level construct valid measure. So you can, that's all I have to say, right? Like the thing works upside down, inside out, with girls, with boys, you know, and now that measure's been translated into Spanish, Urdu, the Finnish translation's happening, and there are at least 35 poor PhDs in the United States that are using the measure to validate it as well. So, and how we're finalizing that is that we're testing its invariance across time. We've got 5,400 students at 3 time points where we're going to see if the measure maintains its validity across time, and primary and secondary school. So that's one of the little things that I've come up to. The meta-analysis, and the other one that escapes from around, we've got 3. One of the things that I did in my spare time again was develop a new bullying intervention. It's been implemented in 6 schools, 4,200 students, 6 time points in waves over 2 years. So I'm finishing the multi-level analysis of that for publication. And it was effective, very modest effect sizes, but it's the first such intervention in high schools to actually demonstrate purely in high school effectiveness. All of the other meta-analysis join the high schools up and the primary school kids to get an effectiveness. As far as I know, there's not been a purely secondary school intervention in Australia that's working. That would be the first one. So those are the 3 main things, as well as other things that we get to talk about, like robot analysis, other fun things with Philip. Yeah.
What a lot of people here are working on meta-analysis, and your story about the meta-analysis is really quite interesting, because the meta-analysis that was done in this area was in Cochrane Review, so it's the very top of the epitome, and it's terrible. There were relatively few random control trials. The conclusions were largely based on poor quality studies, and they didn't really take into account the moderators. And so Roberto and I were going to save the world and redo the meta-analysis. And much to our chagrin, we discovered that the guy who did the Cochrane Review has just published the first version of a meta-analysis that updates it, so we got gazumped. But what we did find also was, I guess because it's the Cochrane Review, all his data is available. So it's available in an SPSS save file. So it's easy to go back and reanalyze his original data and see if our conclusions that if you look at the appropriate moderators that they don't hold up, whether or not that will actually happen. So it's an interesting detective sort of game within the meta-analysis.
It's exactly
come back.
It's exactly the detective. We're tearing apart and saying, Some of the conclusions were like, really? Like, I show you the thing. Really? Like this, no one used that, and you're saying that this is one of the most effective things. But nobody used it. When you see the little red things, yeah, right?
Yeah, a fascinating critique of intervention research in this field. And just 2 comments and 1 question. So crime going down, to what extent is that about physical crime, right? And what about non-physical types of crime, like financial crime? I mean, may have gone up in the same time, right? And if there's such a shift, then, I mean, what about different types of bullying? So, I mean, the picture may be just a bit more differentiated. And the second thought I had was, so the component reported most frequently was informing teachers, and that was 39%. I cannot imagine a school intervention not informing teachers. So, is this about also just about underreporting in the single studies?
Absolutely. Well, you'll be happy to know, Reinhard, that your Australian intervention was the first one that actually skilled, which it sounds like really, like before they were informed, like they were told this is what bullying is. But it was the first study where we actually took the teachers that created what's called a consulting team of teachers in the school, trained them in best practice behavior management, really. And then they did a retraining of their teachers. And that had not been done before.
Okay.
So no, you're quite right. Like, it may be that sounds. The other thing is that when you ask students who would you tell if you were being bullied, I think the last person is definitely the school counsellor. I remember that because I was a bit hurt. But the last, and I think way down the middle is the teacher. So the teachers, and Pepper and others have done studies where they put cameras, I don't know how they got away with that, and viewed the playground. And teachers intervene in less than 20% of incidents that they see in the playground. So yeah, no, teachers are quite amazing.
My question would be, I mean, so what you're proposing is a design-based approach, right? No, there are different kinds of designs, and there's this tension between global versus local, right? So I can, as an engineer, design machines that work under all, let's say a car engine works under all conditions as long as it's not minus 100 Celsius or something like that, right? Then there are these intermediates based on general principles but locally adapted, like sustainable farming and so on. But then there may be also really local, very idiosyncratic kinds of designs that cannot be generalized in any ways. So as I understand your solution, it would still be based on some general principles, which then would be locally adapted, or how would you conceive that?
Well, that's a fantastic question because it becomes that how do we evaluate. So the first principle is that we need to have really solid measures, like that we can sort of say this is robust. So then, irrespective of what we're doing, then we have at least a common metric. That's the first thing. Then the second part is trying to figure out whether there are, so for example, I'm overusing the example of the engineering, but surely there will be some common principles. But what I'm arguing is that we're still not there yet, and this reanalyzing of meta-analysis and looking deeper into these kinds of intervention is to try and see, well, are there some common principles? I think telling the teacher, skilling the teachers will be a common principle, more based on ADHD interventions and trauma interventions and things like that. When you skill the teacher, a lot of good things happen. But yeah, that's the next frontier really, is to see whether from a common metric or an acceptable metric that we can actually rely on, we do interventions and we're able to better pick what are the bits of work. I genuinely would be hard pressed to tell you these are the things that must be in an intervention. So that's the next frontier in relation to this, and you know, the next sort of opportunity in relation to research design. How do we do this locally? I like what you said about the global. You know, how do we assess global ideals being implemented in a very specific local scenario? Thank you for that.
Just a brief comment alongside of that one. I think in the public health area, where instead of some of there are some successful approaches that are dealing with that problem. So if you look at there's something called intervention mapping, where basically they put together all the stakeholders, including children, teachers, whoever is theoretically involved in the problem, and say, you know, look, what can we do to solve this problem? There's this, there's that. So it's an intervention that is designed within the specific context. And also there's some more general principles within the Medical Research Council of Cambridge.
Yeah,
so
well,
there's some.
I'm familiar with the medical one because, you know, when people say cancer, there's 200 different types of cancer. It's one,
Yeah.
so they are. Yeah.
But if you look at the intervention mapping, it's actually how to, you know, put in place that general framework.
Personalized medicine.
So the general approach, thinking between the two of you now and just literally making it up on the spot, would actually perhaps would be the principle that's applied, that's constant, and to that principle we have the facets, the education or the thing, but basically like if I'm clinically, that you have a clinical interview that follows certain steps. What you ask in those certain steps varies, but the steps of the clinical interview don't. It could be something like that, just like I said, thinking about it just on the spot. You know, where there's a framework to which you organize the intervention bits. Does that make sense? And the framework is global. The intervention bits are local. That's sort of like my thinking about it at this very spot, not having had much. Too deep. Yeah.
Has the nature and prevalence of bullying been compared to different populations outside of schools? Because you talk about how there is all these influences from macro, meso, micro, and so on, yet it seems to be a very specialized population. So if they are arguing that it has all these different...
Yeah, and that's an excellent point, because they argue that, and then they don't. I actually asked that very question at the conference. I said, so how come we call it school bullying? Why aren't we just talking about bullying? And it was a bit of a flat. People agreed that we should, but they said the feedback I got, so I'll give you the same answer, was that, then this makes it a bit more constrained, so we can actually focus on this. But this workplace bullying, there's a lot of literature on that, particularly in health and nursing. Then there's sports, and we've heard about all this, but there's a need for that. It's not being looked at. Everyone's just on their own little fields, and they're not talking to each other.
It's really complicated when you think about, you know, what is the function of bullying? What's the function of aggression? Why wouldn't you go to a teacher? You know, and so, well, aggression may be something that kind of builds status, and going to the teacher is the exact opposite of building your social status.
That's really important. Like, I've looked into this in relation to the difference between teasing and bullying. Right? So if you go to the anthropology literature, which you can do if you don't want to sleep one day as well, and they looked a lot to teasing within anthropology and its function.
Yeah.
And teasing plays a very, very important role in romantic relationships. Which is, now the bullying research, I can tell you for a fact, like all the books, they treat teasing and bullying as the same thing, even in their meshes. Yet, I'll just throw it out of my head, but it's around 90% of romantic relationships have an initial contact which is involved with the tease. Yeah. It's like, oh, you know, I love your hair, then you stick your fingers in the socket, or something like that, and then it qualitatively begins to be different, right? And at some point it diverges depending on the intent. And I've argued in my thesis actually that the intent is that it's teasing if I want to be your friend. So teasing is done for me to warn you, hey, the shoes you're wearing don't fit our group. Change them. So, oh, what, did you get those shoes off a clown or something like that? And now if you're a savvy kid, you go, oh, okay, it hurts a bit. And then you go, oh, okay, but then you come back with different shoes and you're in. Right? But you're in, and I want you in. But if I do that and then you come back with worse shoes and then you come up with a clown head on your nose and you think, oh, I'm being so cool because usually that's what the therapist or the kid do. Oh, be yourself. Yeah, maybe. Then I need to exclude you now. I don't want you to come on with me because you don't fit my norms. And I've argued that that's when now I want to hurt you. And that's when then bullying begins. But you're quite right, the purpose of aggression in hierarchies, it's quite...
So it gets multi-level, doesn't it? Because you have, now, you're not just looking at individuals being bullies and needing to be taught to stop doing that, but the system that reinforces it, you know, what kind of context makes bullying more likely, more reinforced?
More reinforced.
And now you're talking about the school level, and
And the thing is, you know, there's very little theoretical underpinning to it. People are just doing stuff with no theoretical backing. So one of the unusual things that happens in bullying, is what you've mentioned at the school level, so is the fact that there are kids who exclude other kids without even knowing them. So let's say it's me, so I don't point at anyone, you take it personal. So I'm the one that's had the cuties, they call you in America, or the germs, or boy germs, girl germs. Now when a new person comes in and is negotiating their social relationship and hierarchical position in that school, well then the last thing they want to do is play with you, because you cost them social capital. And so now I have never met you, or I've never met me, and I'm excluding you. And that, where's the power imbalance in that again? Like where does power come in that? Like, you know, I've never spoken to you, but I want to be your friend, not his friend. And I've heard that you don't like him, so I've never met him. I don't care about him. So easy for me to just, and I will actively exclude you. I will actively, well, oh yeah, right, whatever, yeah, you sure we'll get together. And again, that's not explained by these very hard models, power imbalance, and it's always done to hurt. I don't want to hurt him. I just don't know that no one is excluding him.
Yeah.
I mean, including him. I have no idea about that. But in the definition of bullying, they all said that there's an intent to hurt.
I don't think,
you hit it like, well, you know, what are the functions of aggression? It's not always to hurt.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen it with the frame of reference stuff, you know, like, so, you know, in high school, it's like somebody does something that kind of draws attention to themselves, and the group kind of gangs up on that person, and everybody's kind of thinking, thank Christ it's not me.
Yes.
You know, it's like, that's the lightning rod. So now we've got a lightning rod. Let's torture the lightning rod, and everybody's like, thank Christ.
Yeah.
They're not necessarily, I mean, some of them are trying to hurt, but others are just like saying, I'm safe.
Well, they don't want to become,
you know?
yeah, but kids tell you this. When I tell them, well, why don't you be friends with Fred? Then I'll be Fred. If I'm friends with Fred, I'll be Fred. Yes.
Yeah.
One of the fascinating things that you showed in some of your research was the relationship between victims and bullies. There's victims become bullies, and victims identify with bullies. And so when we ask people what they would do, would they support the victim or whatever, and do they feel socially aligned with the victim and things like this, the victims were more critical of victims than people that were neither bullies nor victims. They wanted, and then they eventually became the bullies when they got a little older and there was somebody younger around.
And you know, humbleness and humility. That was such a good paper. It was called In the Looking Glass. And it's still hardly quoted by any of the bullying researchers. We basically demonstrated that over time these kids cross over. They don't stay stable. So they come in and they become victims and they go to bullies and they come in and and that many of their subconscious and psychological traits.
I think some of them would. I would think you're talking about kids that maybe due to their aggressiveness they're getting bullied, but then they become, because I mean, there are kids that are just gentle, sweet, adult-like kids I've seen, they just get tortured.
Yes.
You know, they even dress like adults, and they never switch to bullies. Yeah. So I mean, there's subtypes. I would argue there's subtypes of kids.
It's a subtype.
There's this common theme of identification with the aggressor, right?
Yeah, that's what I think. So I think
and
maybe they're getting bullied because they were being a bit aggressive or insulting, and the game, you know, that type of bullying. That's right. Versus the kids that's really. The ones I get in my interventions are these really sweet kids that every parent loves. You can just see they just hone in on weakness. It's like the gazelle, and all the crocodiles are going.
Can I be really naughty now and tell you that you don't want to be the sweet kid that every parent loves.
Yeah,
you want to be the sweet kids at your school love. And teaching your kids to be the sweet kids that adults like is not a good strategy with your kids. It isn't. You got to teach your kids to be the kid that the kids like, because that's who's going to bash you up if they don't like it. Like I'm sorry to say that, like that's just like the sort of.
Absolutely.
So it's difficult to navigate that thing. You don't teach them to be cruel bastards. Like that's what I'm talking about.
Some kids are just temperament. There's so many different categories. Just gentle, temperamentally, they just don't have it in them. They're shy.
But many of the kids are actually, because you see, the interesting thing about bullies is that and they've even done this in research with rats. So if you get a really tiny rat, which plays with a big rat, and the rat beats it, right? But if that rat beats it all the time, the little rat won't play with it anymore.
Yeah.
But if the big rat lets it win, around 30% of the time, that rat keeps on playing, the little one keeps on playing. And when bullies target, so there's no bully that targets the kid in the wheelchair at school, let me tell you. Because that gains you nothing. Then you're like, you know, pathological.
Yeah.
So that really neat, nice kid with a bow tie, I haven't seen him walking around, like, could get away with actually being the odd kid that everybody likes. It's
You just have to go far enough away. You're totally commit to being.
Difficult, and this is all up for grabs in research. This is all up for grabs. All these differentiations haven't been made. No one's been looking at them. They're not. Why is it? Yes, sir.
The fascinating thing that we did is that because we had this longitudinal data, we had good measures of bullying and good measures of being a victim and good measures of depression. And the assumption was that if you are victimized, you're going to be depressed. And so we were able to look at the reciprocal effects model and show that the reciprocal relationship was really the opposite, that people were depressed became targets of bullying, and so victims are chosen because of weaknesses, and depression is apparently a fairly salient one. I'm sure there's lots of others, but the causal ordering, to the extent that we could establish it, was at least the other way around. So this issue of who gets targeted is a really critical one.
It's a real critical one, and at the moment it's predominantly assumption-based. It is. It's really like in various strata they say, well, if you're this and you're suffering, you're more likely to. Perhaps we don't really know. Like the certain one is if you're male. That's the certain one. If you're male, you're more likely to bully, and you're more likely to be bullied.
That's only if you're talking overt bullies, surely. I mean, women, girls, and boys can use passive aggressiveness very powerfully.
Yeah.
I would really. I've seen some arguments against this idea that there's even much difference between girls and boys in aggression.
There isn't. No, I've got the data.
Yeah. Okay. There you go. So I'm arguing with you. You've said.
Well, you know what happens is because we looked at that. Because I looked at exclusion and verbal bullying, and across all of them, boys do more than girls. Girls do more like within themselves. Within girls, they do more the indirect bullying, and within boys, they do more. But overall, boys still beat them. They still beat them. And
even in indirect.
The indirect.
Well, there's not much difference, but that's the highest that girls do, and it's the lowest that the boys do.
But it's so contextual. I mean, I've seen, like, for example, in the police force where there's a lot of strong characters. I noticed seemed like a lot more indirect aggression than you would think amongst so many people who are so direct and tough, usually. But the passive aggressive. It's good to an art form.
It's still up for grabs. Like I said, that was the first, and I didn't make much of it because everybody when I found those findings was overt. Girls are overtly more aggressive than boys. Full stop. And I was worried that if I'd already said enough things in my thesis which still caught the eye of one of the examiners.
What, they claim that girls are more overtly aggressive?
Boys? No, the boys are equal.
That they're equal.
It's a least that the boys do. So within boys, it's a least. But between boys still do it more than girls. So it's boys will also do rumor spreading and mongering, and like it's still to this day the most significant epithet that they use is or you're gay or you're a slut, and they spread rumor, and it's higher than what girls do. So the overall rates, but nevertheless within girls, most definitely girls use that more.
Do you have evidence on cyberbullying? Cyberbullying in terms of the
well, at that time I didn't look at cyberbullying, but I had another Lucy, and the problem with cyberbullying, at least from the measurement perspective, is that the cyberbullying goes and merges into the indirect and the verbal. We just could not factor it out. We could not factor it. Just the items just go in and become part of the verbal scale or the social relational scale, which was quite interesting.
One thing we found in the study was that when girls did use those kind of aggressive antisocial strategies, it cost them more in terms of well-being. So they were lower self-esteem, more, worse mental health kind of stuff. And the boys who did the same strategy. So it's kind of, I suspect it's culturally inconsistent with what you expect it to be like then.
Well, this is like the horrible, I've always got the unlucky research which says that if you're a boy and you mature early, right, so you get taller early, you start looking like a man earlier, everything gets laid down at your feet. If you're a girl, then the same thing happens. So you're basically at risk of every mental health issue
Oh, really?
than a boy. So basically, if you mature earlier as a girl, you're more likely to basically tick a box. So there are these big cultural things.
More likely to
If
use
you mature
ice.
a boy and you're early, you're big, oh yes, here comes, Sue. Yeah, but if you mature and you look like a woman very early on, you're 7 and 8, all girls begin to exclude you, you hang around the wrong age group, which are interested in other things, and you're only very young,
Wow, okay.
and your developmental path is quite nasty if you're an early maturing girl versus an early maturing boy.
Especially if you're Anglo-Saxon girl.
Well, not that.
For the immigrant girls, it's different.
For which
is
side?
it?
For some of the immigrant girls, it's different.
It's culturally different. Yes,
Alex
yes.
Moran did a study on that, and so early puberty was a positive social asset for some minority immigrant girls, and it was a negative for Anglo-Saxon girls in terms
Yeah,
of
no, yes.
well-being.
Particularly, and this, yes, and the that's what I mean about the cultural effects.
Yeah.
There's almost no cross-gender bullying. That's always quite interesting. So boys pretty much don't bully girls, and girls pretty much don't bully boys, at least not in school.
Yes. No, at least not in school. Yeah. And the ones that do are usually the ones that have a lot of other stuff going on. Because we had depression, self-esteem measure, anger expression measure, and the ones that are at the extreme of those, well, they do lots of weird things. They don't just do that.
Okay.
But because when you ask students, so I had a question, have you ever been bullied? And this goes again about the functional regression. 80% of students say yes. They don't continue to be. They don't continue to be. But if you ask them, in your experience at school, have you experienced bullying at any time? 80% say yes. So there's lots of really interesting, dynamic things happening. So, which are really like not being tapped into like that. That was really interesting. 80%.
I'd like to know the 20%. We're like 6'7".
And then so what's called the lifetime prevalence. The lifetime prevalence is about 3 to 6% depending on country. So out of that whole bunch, about 1 or 2% remain in that situation. What's going on? Can't tell me what's going on. What happens to them? How come they get out of it?
I'd like to know what the never believer. What are they like? I wouldn't know because I
yeah, but that's
what are they like?
And what are we talk about resilience and all these sorts of things. They're the ones who how come if just about everyone who gets into school, when everyone's cramming for the hierarchy and everyone's who's on top, who's in the bottom, you're going to experience some of these. What does those ones, the cynical guy, oh, they're just tough and mean? Well, really, I don't know about that. That don't experience these. That they just go, what would they happen to? I want to know what you're like. What can you teach us about things like that? Look, I can genuinely talk about this all day, so I'm going to stop. But thank you so much for your patience. Thank you very much.